This is Orsi, official old guy at oldguytalkstome.com, a podcast dedicated to helping older guys create kick-ass lives for themselves and those that they love. It's for women too. Each week, I bring you a special guest to help you create that life that you imagine for yourself and those that you love. We talk anti-aging medicine, personal growth, relationships, and sex, vices, and other topics that many don't want to talk about but need to. Just because you're getting older doesn't mean you have to be old. Also, if you want to know 3 ways to get laid more frequently without begging, go to oldguytalks.com and opt in. When you do, you're going to get my informative video on 3 simple things you can do to get laid more frequently without begging, so you don't have to turn in your man card. And ladies, you may want your man to know these things, because I think you'll like it too. Additionally, you'll be notified weekly when a new podcast episode is ready for you to consume. Periodically, I will share with you other stuff that will help you create that life that you want for yourself and those that are important to you. Don't want to miss anything? Be sure to subscribe, share, and review this podcast. Did you know that there are 76 additives that have been approved by the FDA that can be added to wines? You want a wine with shit in it that may not be good for you? Well, there is an option for wines that have been produced naturally, organically, that have been tested, that have no sugar. And when they don't have any sugar, that means that they're ketosis and intermittent fasting friendly. These wines have been produced with a great deal of care on small farms and are available to you. How do you get them? Find out by going to www.oldguytalks.com/dry farms, all one word with an S, and find out more. And with your initial order, you can get a bottle for 1 penny. That's right, a bottle for 1 penny. And they taste great. They taste great. Don't wait, don't hesitate, don't procrastinate. Get those wines now. This is Oris, the official old guy at oldguytalkstome.com, a podcast dedicated to helping older guys create kick-ass lives for themselves and those that they love. And part of that is, well, figuring out what's going on in the world and what's coming down the pike in the future. And today I got a special guest, George Chanos, who served as Nevada's 31st Attorney General. He's the chairman of Capriotti's and Wing Zone, 2 of the fastest growing franchises in the country. He's also a strategic business consultant, an author, and a speaker. Mr. Chanos has been advising leaders in business and government for over 30 years. He also successfully argued a case before the United States Supreme Court and won 9-0. His most recent book, Millennial Samurai, A Mindset for the 21st Century, takes a look at the technological revolution and how it will likely impact our lives over the next 30 years. Mr. Chanos has been called a futurist and a visionary. He believes that the world is at a tipping point, poised to either evolve into a second enlightenment or fall into dystopian division. He believes the choices that we make over the next 10 years will profoundly influence our collective future for the next 100 years. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
My pleasure. I had the opportunity to see you speak at the Joe Brown lunch in Las Vegas here, and so that's kind of how we ended up here. So I always ask my guests one question at the very beginning, and that is, what is the most important thing you've done today?
The most important thing I've done today? Hug my wife.
Okay. That's a good one. That's not one I haven't heard. So, but you know, that's kind of an interesting one to pick. Yeah, because my wife and I always do that too. Make sure that we start. That's how we start the day. Yep. Is with a hug. So
no better way to start the day.
No, actually, it's a great way, and I think if people did that more, they'd be happier in their relationships. So, you know, in your quote, I love the quote from Frank Zappa, who's actually one of my favorites, musicians. He says, "A mind is like a parachute; it doesn't work if it isn't open." And I think that's so true, because so many people are just locked into their opinions. I mean, I'll admit to do it. But he also said something else interesting. I don't know if you're aware of. He said that replacing civics with social studies was a big mistake when that happened in the curriculum.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that he's probably right on that.
Oh, I think he's absolutely right. So let's talk about some of the stuff in your book. And you
Before you move on from Frank Zappa, I just wanted to note that one of the things that I read in some of my reading related to the brain was that some believe that the greatest minds that have ever been among us are musicians, because the act of being a musician involves so many different parts of your brain.
Sure.
That the argument is that someone like Amadeus may have been more brilliant than Einstein because of that. But anyway, go ahead. Didn't want to.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. You've said in your book that millennials would. Let's talk about millennials for a little bit, and then we'll move on. So maybe, I'm gonna do some bashing here too.
Sure. Go ahead. Everybody else does.
I got 2 millennials. It's not like I don't have any.
I got a couple myself.
Yeah, I got a couple of millennials, and they felt like, oh, everybody's always bashing us. And I go, okay, yeah, fine. Why would millennials or some millennials work for $40,000 a year versus 100,000? And because a lot of people still want to have their cake and eat it too.
Yeah. Well, so there was a study, and I think it was the Pew Research Foundation that may have been involved, but they surveyed some millennials, and basically they found that millennials would rather make $40,000 a year at a job they find interesting than $100,000 a year at a job they find boring. And so it's different, it's very interesting that generation just has different priorities, and we look at those priorities. I'm from the baby boomer generation, right? And my father was from the greatest generation. And we all have, different kind of beliefs and priorities. The greatest generation had some of the greatest virtues, and the fidelity to core values and ancient core values, and personal responsibility and a work ethic, and drive and determination. And, they built much of what we're enjoying today. And then the baby boomers came along, and they were, when I was, growing up, the baby boomers were the biggest thing because there were 80 million of them, and they were the largest generation in history. And everybody was talking about the baby boomers and how they were going to change society, and they did. Much of what we're also enjoying today came from my generation, the baby boomers. And now we've moved into this new generation, and they are bigger than the baby boomers. There are 85 million of them. And now the focus is on them. Just like I remember advertisers and everybody was focused on the baby boomers. Well, today they couldn't give a crap about the baby boomers because they're not the consumers of the future. They're dying off and getting older, and what every advertiser cares about today is the millennials and Gen Z, the consumers of the future.
Right.
And so it's important to understand what do those consumers look like? What does that cohort look like, and how do they feel about things? And they are very different. 40% of, you hear this 40% figure come up a lot. I've heard that and read that 40% of millennials are religiously unaffiliated. For 40% of them, and this, when I say 40, it could be 42, it could be 39, right? But 40% of them are politically unaffiliated, and 40% of them have tattoos. So they're a very different kind of makeup than my generation, right? You won't find 40% of baby boomers with tattoos. And you won't find 40% of baby boomers that are religiously or politically unaffiliated. So it's a different mindset. Now, we as baby boomers look at that mindset and we're puzzled by it. It doesn't quite make sense to us. And the world that we lived in, and the world that we grew up in, and the world that we had our professional careers in and prospered in, those kinds of behaviors and thoughts that millennials have, we believe might not have fared as well in our generation, right? They wouldn't have been as successful. They wouldn't have been as industrious. They wouldn't have been as self-reliant, right? So we question some of those behaviors and those values and beliefs that they have today. But what we don't factor in is that the world that they're living in and the world that they're going to live in is very different than the world that we lived in. And so who knows what is going to really be better and more advantageous for the world going forward. So for example, I would argue that being politically unaffiliated is exactly what they should be. They should be nonpartisan. They should be politically unaffiliated. And they should cherry pick their issues and their representatives, not based on party, but based on the substance behind the individual and the idea. And that maybe we got it wrong and they got it right on the issue of partisanship and political affiliation. So not all of their decisions are, just because we don't understand them or just because they're not the same as ours, doesn't mean that they're wrong for the life that they're going to live in the time that they're going to live. Collaboration and cooperation is going to be much more important than it ever has been. And division is going to be much more dangerous than it ever has been. So, and we're getting more and more division right now. So the notion of, we ought to be politically affiliated and we ought to be partisan, I think is exactly the wrong approach towards society today and tomorrow. So it's an interesting kind of analysis.
They may not be politically party affiliated, but the wokeness is its own political party in some respects.
Yes, but wokeness also, there are elements of wokeness that I think are horrible, and there are elements of wokeness that I think are completely appropriate and beneficial. So, for a long time, we have kind of ignored some of the issues that they are focused on, right? So they might be focused on economic inequality, or they might be focused on the criminal justice system and some of its inherent inequities, right? And these are things that actually they need to be focused on because these are kind of festering problems that we have too long ignored. And so they do need to address these issues and they do need to be concerned about these issues. But some take it too far, and some, want to think that being woke means embracing socialism or embracing communism.
Sure.
And in that respect, I think that they are horribly wrong. And if continuing in that direction, it would lead to a very dissatisfying and unproductive and unhappy place.
Yes. The socialism and communism, two systems where everyone is equally unhappy.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, my parents fled Eastern Europe during World War II to avoid that.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of and the relatives that stayed there were very unhappy when we came to visit them several years.
But realize that informed your perspectives. That history informed your perspective. And these young people don't have that history. They didn't flee Eastern Europe, and they didn't experience that. So, that's not what they heard about from their parents. A lot of them, what they heard about from their parents was maybe, the way racial discrimination set them back. And so that's what they heard. So that's what, that's kind of influencing their modern day perspective.
Yeah. There's just so many issues today, that are going on that are kind of falling into these areas. And part of my challenge also is that when people don't have facts.
Yes.
And, even, everybody goes, well, follow the science. Well, science is never settled. Scientists argue all the time. If you ever go to a scientific meeting, they have huge egos, and they argue all the time.
Yes.
And so people like science is never so, but you talk about critical thinking, but my concern is that the forces of political correctness really impede critical thinking. And
Absolutely.
And I mean, right now, the issue of the trans athletes,
yeah,
which totally will wipe out, if they continue on this course, will totally wipe out the gains that women have made in sports.
Yeah.
And I had a gentleman on my program, and we talked about that, and he actually helped write the position paper for the USA Powerlifting Association, and he went through all the science, and
Yeah.
it was like bone mass, muscle mass, number of neurons firing, all sorts of things, and the caveat is, everybody goes, well, they have the same testosterone levels. Well, a double X and an XY process testosterone differently physiologically. You can have the same level, you can measure the same blood levels, but they process it differently. And so there's a huge advantage to trans athletes competing as women in women's sports.
There's no question in my mind that that there is an inherent difference between a trans athlete and a female athlete. And to not take that into consideration, I think, is a mistake.
Yeah, I think there's a case, I think it's in Connecticut, where some high school girls are suing the state. And then this again, maybe like 100 meters or 1,500 meter running or whatever, but 25% of the boys in that state can beat the girls record in that sport.
Yeah.
The state, right? Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, yeah. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so. I believe that as a society we need to be as welcoming and tolerant and receptive to people's differences,
right,
as we can. But I also believe that we don't throw common sense out the window, and we don't throw fairness out the window in pursuit of some standard of wokeness that someone creates for us. So
and heaven forbid you should, the challenge I have now, and I was at a meeting, actually a medical meeting, and we were talking about this, and one of the people said, like, well, I just don't want to get into it because it's going to be difficult. And I'm going, like, you have to start standing up at some point. You got to start standing up for common sense. You just can't road. So
what's interesting is I have kind of one North Star that pretty much guides me on almost all of these issues, and that North Star is truth, right?
Sure.
So just speak the truth, right? And let the chips fall where they may, and
exactly.
Yeah, and so just speak the truth, and try to be as empathetic and tolerant as possible while doing it. But I'm not going to ignore reality, and I'm not going to buy into falsehoods to accommodate those who feel the need for that. I'm going to speak the truth, and some of the truth that you just mentioned about differences in physiology are just truth, and so it I don't think that we advance our society by ignoring truths. I think we advance our society by recognizing truths and then accommodating our differences.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things in your book here. You talk about life isn't fair, and that's something I've been telling my kids all along, and for a long time. And actually, the corollary is they don't want fair because they're on the other side of fair. They're on very good. They're in the very good spectrum of life, so they don't want fair. Fair would be a downgrade for them. But my belief is that you're not entitled to fair or many things in the world, because that's just not the way how the world is. There's, as you mentioned, there's bad people out there, and things don't always work fair. But what is your view on the concept of fairness and this whole thing that's coming up here in society called equity?
Oh my God. So first of all, the standard used to be equality, right? Equality of opportunity.
Right.
And that's to me, that there ought to be an even playing field, and we all ought to have equality of opportunity. And I don't believe in equity as a standard that we should shuffle the deck to create this fantasy equity environment where everything is equitably divided somehow. That to me is essentially communism or socialism, and I don't believe in that at all. I'm a capitalist, but I also believe that the playing field has not been level completely. There have been disadvantages to certain groups over the centuries, and I think that truth requires that we recognize those, and I believe that we've also ignored some of those issues to our collective peril. There have been all sorts of reasons for this. Politics has played an essential role, whether it was, today Republicans are being accused of ignoring these issues or oppressing some of these groups. Well, 50 years ago, it was Democrats who were very much the groups that were doing what is being complained about today. In the South, for example, there were Jim Crow laws, and there were voting restrictions and things that were imposed by Democratic politicians because they wanted to win elections in districts that were predominantly Black. Yeah. And so they purposely disadvantaged the Black voter. Yeah. And so these things happened, right? They're real. They did happen. And yet today, those same Democrats are arguing that we don't need voter ID because it somehow acts in the same way. It oppresses these communities, which I think is frankly bullshit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
India has voter ID, and Mexico has voter ID, and we don't. And the idea, in India, if they need to go out into the jungle to find a guy who lives on his own and he's the only person in the village, there are documented cases of the Indian government doing this so that one lone individual can cast his vote. So there are mechanisms to ensure that every eligible voter in the United States can vote and can have a voter ID. We could also use blockchain to hold our elections and prevent voter fraud, and to give access to everyone. We could use technology today to allow you to vote year-round from your computer, And if you didn't have a computer, you could walk into certain kiosks that could be in, every pharmacy or every bank or every post office that would allow you to vote from a terminal year round. And so, and even on issues rather than candidates. So we have the technology to do some great things and create greater equity. But the idea that we penalize certain groups or take away from certain groups to achieve equity for others is a very slippery slope.
Yeah, well, and this is actually kind of going to jump ahead a little bit to some of my other things I want to talk about, because we talked about equity and groups and things like that. And from my perspective is that we've switched from some of the racial issues to it being economic. Yeah. Because of it. But one of the things that you talked about, the parties and things like that, most people don't know that the 1964 Civil Rights Act was only passed because Everett Dirksen, as a Republican in the minority, went along with several Democrats to get that passed. It would never pass without Republican support.
Right.
And the one of the offshoots of that, which I'm going to go one of the things that you talk about, is you'll remember, you're old enough to remember LBJ and the Great Society. We're going to end poverty in our lifetime. Yeah. And all he did was he institutionalized it by giving money to women who had babies without a father in the house.
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah, and people like, because the black family was very much intact. Yeah. You know, even during the racial discrimination day. But I want to go
we actually destroyed the black family.
Oh, absolutely.
With that policy. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Because if you were a young girl in living in a desperate situation, let's say your parents were not role models and you wanted to get out of that house, instead of the US government saying, you know what, if you graduate from high school and you don't get pregnant, and you graduate from high school, we will give you the down payment on a home, right? Which would have been relatively much cheaper than what we ended up doing. If instead of incentivizing the kind of behavior that we wanted to see, we ended up doing something that was the reverse. We said, if you get pregnant and if the man leaves you, then we will give you a home, and then we will give you money. And so we had situations where, literally there are people in these communities, men in these communities that have as many as 10 or 12 baby mamas, where they have impregnated many women, and these women have had children, and the guy is nowhere to be found. And then now society is having to deal with all of these single mothers.
Yeah, well, yeah. In your book, you write about the repercussions of this. You said, I'm going to quote here: 43% of children in the U.S. live in fatherless homes. 90% of the homeless runaways are from fatherless homes. 80% of rapists are from fatherless homes. 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes. 85% of youths in prison are from fatherless homes, and 71% of high school dropouts are from fatherless homes.
Yeah. So what happens? What happens is that first of all, these single mothers I want to point out are heroic in the fact that they're raising these children on their own, and I respect that, and I applaud their efforts to try to do what they can with the situation that they find themselves in. Getting into that situation, I do not applaud. And if you really think about it and you look at those statistics, what's happening is, so this, take an average woman in one of these underserved communities that ends up getting pregnant, having a child, and the father leaves. What happens to that child is that, first of all, they're raised by the mother alone as opposed to a mother and father, which disadvantages them. Many of these homes are broken. They don't have supportive family structures like, role models in their aunts and uncles and grandparents. But beyond that, these young men who are children, babies born into these environments that are men, are often told by their mothers, you're the man of the house, and you've got to grow up, and you've got to, succeed, and you've got to go out and do things and take care of your family. And these very, very young kids have number one, that burden of being the man of the house at a very, very young age. And then number two, there's got to be a resentment that builds up. Think about the attitude of that young boy whose father is nowhere to be found. How does he feel about older males generally, right? Does he develop some kind of a belief system or a mindset towards older males or figures of authority, right? So now he encounters older male police officers who act as figures of authority, and he doesn't trust older men in the first place, and he didn't have a father figure that was there. His father left him. He's maybe in prison. And so how are they interacting with other male authority figures, whether it's teachers, whether it's police, whether it's employers? And so I think there's this cascading consequence to this that we're not fully aware of, how this is manifesting itself. But and then education levels decline, interest in school declines, dropout rates increase, prison rates increase.
Absolutely.
And then this continues generationally, right? So then these same kids that grew up in that environment maybe 50 years ago, then grew up and then they had kids following that same cycle. And then their kids had kids following that same cycle. And it seems to have caused a dumbing down of America, right? Almost a movement towards idiocracy, where Justice Souter of the US Supreme Court said that civic ignorance is the greatest threat facing America. Ignorance. Yeah. And so, we sometimes don't recognize or realize the consequences and the cascading effects of some of these things, but we're dealing with them now. And so what I try to tell people is that, ignoring this situation and ignoring these dynamics and these tinder boxes of discontent that exist all over the United States, and these underperforming communities, ignoring these underperforming communities, ultimately it's all going to percolate up to create a bigger problem for society. And now we're seeing that. We're starting to see the fruits of that neglect. And so it needs to be addressed. And the one good thing about the millennial mindset is that at least they're aware of the fact that it needs to be addressed. And they're trying to address it. Now, whether they're addressing it the right way or not is a different issue.
Yeah. Talk about reading and education. The statistic, you're probably familiar with this one, about if you don't read at the third grade level by a third grade, your chances of graduating from high school are really low. You probably will drop out. It means you can't get a job. It means you're going to end up in prison. You're very likely to end up in the system. And as an attorney, I was surprised. I did not realize how illiterate the people that come into a courtroom as defendants are. That they have people just have to read to them and to tell them exactly what's going on. And this whole thing about educating, it's really important that we really teach kids how to read, because that third grade, that's when I guess the concept is that you switch from learning to read to learning by reading. And it just it becomes just very much of a challenge. It's a horrible thing, and I think public schools do a horrible job.
Yeah, public schools do a horrible job, and it is a critical requirement. And developing a love of learning is a critical requirement for the future. And we don't have that. And you see this is showing it. The consequences of this are evident in so many different ways. Not only the way young people interact with police, but you'll see videos today on social media about people misbehaving on airline flights, for example. And these aren't children. These are adults. Right. These are adults who don't seem to comprehend the concept of when you're on a plane at 30,000 feet in a pressurized container, there has to be a very rigid hierarchy of authority in that container to create passenger safety, right? Sure. The captain is in charge. You have to follow the directions. There are specific rules. You can't smoke on a plane. You have to fasten your seatbelt when you're told to. You have to follow the airline stewards or stewardesses instructions. And there are some people who just seem to think that none of these rules apply to them, that rules don't apply to them generally, whether at their home or at the grocery store or on a plane or in a bank, it doesn't matter. They seem to feel that they are entitled to behave the way they want, or they're simply too damn ignorant to understand that, why these rules exist and why they have to follow them. And it's a real problem. In China, interestingly, they have a very different way of controlling this behavior. So in China, right now, your phones are an essential element of life in China, more so than they are here. In other words, you can't typically pay for items with cash in China today. You have to use your phone.
Okay.
There is in the United States, we have a credit scoring system that tells us what somebody's credit worthiness is. In China, they have a social scoring system.
Right.
And so if you act out on a plane, for example, if you don't follow the stewardess's instructions on a plane, you might get an entry in your database that prohibits you from getting on a plane for a year, or you might not ever get on a plane again because the Chinese government doesn't put up with your failing to follow the rules. And so, you find that in populations that are less educated, the mechanisms that society is forced to use to control those populations are more severe and sometimes very draconian. Like in Saudi Arabia, they'll chop your hand off for stealing a loaf of bread, or
sure.
Many countries, things that we take for granted as being in the United States, you can go in and steal up to $1,000 in LA of merchandise out of a store, and it's a misdemeanor. It's a misdemeanor, and you likely won't even be prosecuted. And if you are, you'll be released immediately. You certainly won't go to jail. So, and you can do this repeatedly. So, different societies evolve to deal with their populations. And if our population in the United States continues on its present course, I see a much more authoritarian kind of mechanism that may come into practice to control these unruly populations, many of which are unruly because of ignorance.
And not being brought. You talk also about in your book, you talk about the victimhood, which is really prevalent these days. And I believe that you have a choice in dealing with things. You can't control what comes at you, but you can choose how you deal with them.
100%.
And there's a certain celebrity now also associated with victimhood. That's prevalent. I mean, you get so much attention. You can be, and then so many times we find out that these victims aren't really victims. They just made up the story.
Yeah, well, it's actually become almost codified, or institutionalized. There is a concept called intersectionality. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah. So intersectionality is basically how many liabilities do you have, or how many disadvantages do you
victim
have?
Groups you can fit into.
How many victim groups can you fit into? And the more you can fit into, the more entitled you become. So, for example, if at some universities, if a Black speaker is speaking, the promoters of that speech, I have seen some videos that have directed white people to sit in the back of the stadium because it's a Black speaker and it's for a Black audience, and the Blacks should sit in the front and the whites should sit in the back. Sort of a reversal of the Jim Crow era, where the whites sat in front of the bus and the Blacks sat in the back, and it was wrong then and it's wrong now.
Absolutely.
And so the intersectionality would say, well, if you're gay and you're poor and you're Black and you're deaf and you've got all these other things, then you get more.
Right.
You get the premium seats, and you get a higher level of subsidy, and they're basically racking up points for all of their disadvantages.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a very strange concept to me as well.
Well, when you play the victim card, you also give away your power to say, like, I can't do anything to fix my position, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's debilitating.
It's ability, because if you start saying that, if you start using words like I can't, or they made me do other things like that, then those become very, very much self-fulfilling.
It's interesting on that subject of victim mentality. Two very strange bedfellows. Henry Ford, who was accused of being, somewhat of a conservative, some say even racist, and Oprah Winfrey, who's the exact opposite, seemed to believe the same thing on this issue. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Right.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Whatever you believe, if you believe you can't do it, then you're not going to do it. And if you believe you can do it, well, at least you've got a fighting chance of doing it.
I know.
Oprah says the same thing. If you don't have a sense of belief in yourself, if you don't believe in yourself, if you don't have a sense of hopefulness and aspiration, then you're not going to be successful. And I think they're both right.
Yeah. So you just brought in what I wanted to talk next about, what you think about yourself. And in your book, you talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
And you're right, there's a high statistical probability that you overestimate your knowledge and ability. And I'll tell you that there was actually studies that said that the same was done in terms of self-esteem and academic scores. Oftentimes people that had really high self-esteem really scored poorly on standardized tests for educational tests.
Interesting. So the higher the self-esteem, the lower they scored.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not. So that kind of plays into kind of Carol Dweck's teaching about a growth mindset, that if you tell your children that they're smart, then they will be less likely, if you constantly are telling your kids that they're smart, and rewarding them for getting things right.
Okay. Yep.
That instead that's actually self-defeating, and that instead what you want to do is you want to encourage your kids to take risks and to try things new, and to go out and push themselves and test themselves and compliment them when they try to do something at a higher level. Even if they fail, you reward that behavior, because that's the behavior that you want to encourage. And so what that study that you quoted might be showing is that the kid who's always getting A's, never fails, and has very high self-esteem, actually is not the top performer. The top performer is the kid who's constantly trying to do,
who's working better, stretching themselves.
Stretching themselves.
Yeah, I think that's true. That's true in a lot of situations. I think that quite often we overuse the word friend when we're really actually talking about acquaintances.
Right.
And you talk about about friends in your book, and it's often been said, and I believe it's true to a large extent, that you are the average of the 5 people you hang around with the most.
Yeah.
And so why is it important to pick friends carefully?
Well, first of all, friends occupy a very special place in our lives. We confide in them, we rely on them, we communicate information to them that is sensitive in nature, information that could be potentially harmful to us if misused. And so friends occupy, other than family, they occupy the closest relationships that we typically have. And so they're important relationships. And because they're important relationships, somebody who is a good friend can really elevate you in life, and somebody who is a bad friend can really bring you down.
Sure.
And then you add to that the fact that statistically, we find that as much as 20%, 1 out of 5 people, suffer from some kind of mental impairment, whether it's a substance abuse issue or a physiological cognitive issue. People suffer from mental illness, and that's roughly 20% of our population. So 1 out of 5 people. So that means that some of your friends may have those issues. They may have substance abuse problems. They may have mental health issues. They may have serious mental health issues. Some may be, schizophrenics or psychotics, and so unbeknownst to you. So it's important that you do surround yourself with people that are going to elevate you and help you and be reliable and help you move forward with your life, as opposed to hold you back or cause you to maintain your current status and not move forward because they're not moving forward, right? Yeah. So choosing your friends carefully is important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also to remove toxic people from your life.
I do that all the time. I do not suffer fools, and I do not tolerate negative people in my circle.
Yeah.
I don't. I will move away from them.
Yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes that's family.
And sometimes it is family.
Yeah, sometimes it is family.
And sometimes you even need to move away from them.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine once said, family time, the opportunity to spend time with people you normally wouldn't associate with.
Yeah. Well, that's sometimes.
sometimes that's true. Let's talk about the importance of morning and evening rituals. Because I have a very specific set of things that I do every morning, including meditation, journaling, writing notes to my wife and kids, and then some other things, and exercising. Why are morning and evening rituals important?
Well, because they help you to so your actions, the way you think and the way you act, determines the life that you lead ultimately. And so, and these actions sometimes form habits, and these can be good habits or they can be bad habits. And morning and evening rituals can help you develop habits. When you do something repeatedly over time, you develop a habit. Some say 21 days of repeating something can cause you to develop a habit. So if you develop a morning or evening ritual, whether it includes meditation, whether it includes reading, whether it includes hygiene or diet, all of these things ultimately affect your lifestyle and the life that you lead. So if you're reading something every day and that's part of your ritual, and you're expanding your mind and you're learning more information and you're making this a habit, and you're developing the habit of lifelong learning and bringing in new information constantly. If you're developing the habit of having an open mind, where you're consciously choosing to listen to other people more carefully and more receptively, and you develop that habit, or you develop the habit of exercise. You go out every morning and you walk for a mile, or every night you walk for a mile or run for a mile. All of these things are cumulatively going to impact your life in a very significant way. And so, you identify those things that are good for you, like eating well, exercising, reading, and incorporating those things into a morning or evening ritual that you repeat daily develops these habits that are very productive and developmental, very positive developmental activities that make you a better, stronger, smarter, more resilient, more successful person.
Sure. You also talk about playing to your strengths and the concept of is it ikigai, or how do you pronounce that?
Ikagi. Yeah. So playing to your strengths. So ikagi is basically finding something that you are good at, and something that you love to do, that you enjoy doing, and something that adds value to your life and to others. And if you do something that meets all that criteria, that leads to a well-lived life. And I talk about playing to your strengths and mitigating your weaknesses, because I believe that leveraging your strengths is one of the fastest way to success.
Absolutely.
And mitigating your weaknesses is one of the things that you need to do so that you have more strengths and less weaknesses. And and you can mitigate your weaknesses in any number of ways. You can form partnerships where there might be something that you're good in, and there might be something that you're bad in. And one way to mitigate that weakness, that thing that you're bad in, is to bring on a partner who's good at that thing. And now you have a team where you're playing to your strengths and your team member is playing to their strengths, and you've eliminated the weaknesses. You've covered your bases. Another way to mitigate your weaknesses might be to improve those areas. Let's say you are a bad public speaker. That's not one of your strengths. Well, you could practice that activity. You could join Toastmasters. You could, begin to volunteer to speak more frequently, and you would develop that skill set, and that would allow you to mitigate that weakness. But yeah, very much it's very important that we play to our strengths and mitigate our weaknesses.
Yeah, there's a test, I don't know if you're familiar with it, called the Colby A.
I've not heard of that.
It's a very interesting test because it tells you what your operating system is.
Okay.
And I took it, and it was, and I'll have a link to that test here in the show notes. It told me things that I knew about myself, but I wasn't able to actually articulate, which was kind of interesting in the description. The report that you get on after it's like 50 pages long. I mean, it's very in depth, and like it says, like for me, it said like you're not good at fixing small stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, because of my dyslexia, putting together that bicycle on Christmas Eve was just, there just wasn't enough vodka in the house to be able to finish it in time. But it was, I had somebody I knew took the test 4 times. And the interesting thing about it was he took it when he was doing really well, right before 2008. Took it again in 2010 when he was selling his positions to buy baby formula. Again, when he was on his way up, and now he's a very, very successful entrepreneur in Laguna. And he said the interesting thing was all 4 times the results were the exact same, because it's your operating system, and that doesn't change.
Yeah, there's another test that's mentioned in the book. It's called the MAP, M-A-P-P, career test.
Okay.
And that also takes an inventory of what your strengths and weaknesses are, and directs you towards certain careers and vocations that you are most well suited for. So it's another good source of inventorying your strengths and weaknesses.
So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit, because we can talk about a lot of, where do you see artificial intelligence taking us?
Wow. Well, that's the big question, isn't it? So there's a lot to unpack in that answer. So let me kind of tell you what I think you need to know. First of all, Stephen Hawking in 2014 told us that the singularity that moment in time where machine intelligence will eclipse human intelligence, is called the singularity. And he said that that moment in time will be the greatest event in human history, greater than the wheel, greater than fire, that it will completely change humanity and the lives that we lead. A guy named Ray Kurzweil, who is the head of artificial intelligence for Google, tells us that that moment in time, that singularity, could come as early as 2029, which is 8 years away. Mm-hmm. So first of all, understand that there is a tsunami of technological change on the horizon that is coming. And whether it's 2029 or 2035 or 2040, it really doesn't matter. There is this massive change that's going to occur, where humanity is going to experience an event that is the equivalent to the discovery of fire. And so that's AI. Vladimir Putin in 2017 said that he who controls AI will be able to subjugate the world, will be able to control the world.
Sure.
And so, where do I see this taking us? I believe that it could lead I believe that we have the technology in place today to create a second enlightenment in the world. Instead of using the technology that we have at our disposal, the internet and social media, instead of using that for things like Jake Paul and the Kardashians, if we were instead harnessing that technology to educate humanity and move us forward, there are great gains that we could make. For example, I don't know why the United States, we need over 200,000 people teaching algebra. You could have one teacher that is the most gifted teacher at teaching algebra, and she could be teaching the entire world over the internet what they need to know. So there are ways to leverage technology to create increased efficiency, increased range, where we could reach more people and deliver content more efficiently, more cost effectively, and better content. I mean, you could have all the professors at Harvard and Yale and Stanford teaching all of us online. Why is that education restricted to the elite who can pay $100,000 a year in tuition? Why isn't that information accessible to everyone? Think of how we could transform education if we took that approach. So artificial intelligence is going to create tremendous opportunities that we lack the intellectual capacity to even adequately comprehend, but it will change life as we know it. And how it will manifest itself, no one really knows the extent to which it will manifest itself, but I believe if used properly, it will create massive increased efficiency and abundance, and lead to a second enlightenment. And if used inappropriately or to humanity's disadvantage, then it could lead to a very dark and dystopian future.
Sure, absolutely. That's in talking about that, you also mentioned that your thoughts will no longer be private. That to me is very scary.
Very scary, very, very scary. Yeah, some of the things that I've read are basically that they can right now determine certain information from brain scans where for example, you might be a witness of a crime, and you're trying to recall for a sketch artist what the perpetrator looked like, and you can't articulate it. You can't actually, say it in a way that communicates to the sketch artist what the person looked like. Many believe that in the future, they will be able to attach some kind of apparatus or electrodes to your brain, and they will be able to create a scan that will give them that information, almost like Minority Report, the movie Minority Report, where they could read your thoughts. And,
sure.
And so, there are some that are saying that you'll be able to go to sleep and you'll be able to wake up learning a new language, because they'll be able to infuse that information into your cerebral cortex. Ray Kurzweil at Google says that our cerebral cortex will be connected to the cloud by the 2040s, and that today, when I was growing up, I'd have to go to the library to look something up. And today I go to my phone and I Google it. Well, tomorrow I won't need the phone. I'll just think of a question and the answer will come to me from the cloud, because my neural cortex will be connected to the cloud. And so all I'll have to do is think of a question and the answer will come to me. So reading your thoughts, gaining access to information instantaneously through just thinking about it, all of these things, there's those and many other very phenomenal sci-fi-like sounding things are very likely to occur. There's a futurist named Stuart Brand who says that if someone is talking to you about the future and it doesn't sound like science fiction, they don't know what they're talking about. So the future will very much be like what you now think of as science fiction.
That brings me to my big fear that a lot of there's an opportunity for the tyranny of technology to show up, because you talk about just your searches now that you do on your computer or on your phone. Well, you can search something, but the algorithms will tell you what the answers are, and they're being very much checked. I mean, okay, so I was looking for this picture. I was looking for a picture of this was when the whole thing with the Epstein was occurring.
Yeah.
And I said, Google pictures of Bill Clinton and Epstein. Not a one.
Yeah.
Not a one. Not a one. They all gave me pictures of Donald Trump. This was during the election. But there was not a one.
Yeah. So this is the internet 2.0, and we are moving to the internet 3.0. So the internet that we have today is a centralized internet that is controlled by major players, companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter. These types of companies are now the behemoth tech giants that now control the internet. And the next move, what you're seeing happening in blockchain and crypto, is this move towards a decentralized Web 3.0, where you don't have that control of the Googles and the Facebooks. You have search opportunities that are much more robust and broad. Today, Google's one of the only games in town, and so when you're trying to search for information, they're the default application that you use. And they are a private company that has advertisers and has a revenue model that doesn't lend itself to giving you everything. It lends itself to giving you what they think will satisfy you and what they can monetize.
Right.
And so instead, you're looking for everything, and so you're not going to get that from today's internet. But hopefully you will get that from tomorrow's blockchain. Sure. And that's the whole point of it, to create a decentralized tool that no individual corporation or group of corporations, small group of corporations, controls. And that's where we're moving. And so I'm optimistic that within the next 5 years or so, we're going to have much more access to information than we have today through Google.
Yeah. So you brought up blockchain, cryptocurrencies. There's other financial instruments out there. Can you tell us a little bit about what you see in those things?
Yeah. So essentially, what is happening is that first there was personal computing, and that was in the late 70s, early 80s. We had the introduction of personal computing, and then we had the internet. That was the next big development from personal computing. And then we went to mobile computing, where now we could do everything on the internet on our phones, and everybody had those smartphones. And now we're moving into blockchain. And blockchain is the next new technological development. And then after blockchain, what's coming next is, I believe, called the spatial web. And so blockchain in cryptocurrencies are essentially a decentralized web. They're the internet 3.0. And so the different cryptocurrencies that are popping up, or the different tokens that are popping up, and the different blockchains that are popping up, are all part of that. Think of the blockchain as a railroad, and then cars that sit upon that railroad. And there are multiple railroad tracks. So there might be the Ethereum railroad track, the Ethereum blockchain, or there might be the Cardano blockchain, which is the Cardano railroad, or the Polkadot blockchain, which is the Polkadot ecosystem, the Polkadot railroad. And then different tokens and technologies that are being created to allow the interoperability of these various railroad tracks, these various blockchains. There are coins like Bitcoin that are merely a currency or a store of value. It's being compared to gold bullion, right? You can, we treat gold bullion as a star of value. We give it a value, and that value is commonly shared and believed and accepted and understood by society. Well, Bitcoin can be a substitute for a gold bar as a store of value, as long as society embraces it, recognizes it, accepts it as a valuable instrument. And so Bitcoin is limited in that its functionality is limited to being a store of value or a mechanism of exchange. Ethereum is a different coin, a different token, like a Bitcoin, but different in that it has increased functionality. So what is the increased functionality of Ethereum? On Ethereum, you take a token, and that token can have a smart contract that is attached to it. And that smart contract, you as the offeror are the master of the offer. So you can mint one of these tokens, which is creating one of these tokens, and drop it on the blockchain through code. And that token can have a smart contract attached to it that says, if the bearer of this token is entitled to X, and X could be a piece of art, like an NFT, or it could be your home. You could sell your home on a smart contract attached to a token that is minted on the blockchain, and the buyer of that token buys your home, because the smart contract says whoever buys this token owns my home. And you could put the price of the token at $500,000 or $1 million, whatever you choose to sell your home for. You could put a contract on there that says the holder of this token is entitled to a ticket to a sporting event, the Raiders game, the Chargers game, the Lakers game. So tickets that today take the form of either a QR code or a physical printed ticket, in the future, those tickets could be NFTs that have a smart contract attached to it that says that this is what you get when you buy this NFT. You get a ticket to the Raiders game. That's basically what we're seeing now is the building of these railroads and the building of these interconnective bridges, if you will, between railroads, and the building of the railroad cars that sit upon these railroads. And that is cryptocurrency. That is Bitcoin. That is Cardano. That is XRP. That is Polkadot. These are the utilitarian tokens that allow for these types of transactions. So where the internet was more of a tool of communication, the blockchain is more of a tool, more of a transactional tool, which is why I analogize it to the railroad. The railroad allowed us to ship goods and deliver merchandise and sell things and transport them. Blockchain does the same thing. Blockchain allows you to transport, sell, transact business, move objects and currency and rights and IP digitally along these blockchains, and document who owns it and who buys it and who sells it and for what price and under what terms, and the actual receipt of entitlement is that token. So you buy and sell that token, and when you buy and sell that token, it's like a deed of title to a piece of property. It's the same concept.
Great. Okay. Well, George, I want to thank you for coming on, and everyone, I'm here. You get his book called the Book 1, Millennial Samurai. We just touched the surface because there's just a lot more there to read and read about. It's a great read. It's actually an easy read too, because sometimes you get these books and they're hard to read, but it's actually a pleasant, easy read. So that I appreciated that. So George, thank you again for coming on the program, and maybe we'll have you back sometime to talk about some other stuff.
Thank you for having me. And the book is available on Amazon.com. And so I encourage you to go on Amazon and read the reviews. There are dozens of 5-star reviews about the book. People are very, very excited about it. So I encourage you to check it out.
Yep. And there'll be a link in the show notes to that book too. So on Amazon. So we have it there too. All right, folks, that's all for today. Remember, at oldguytalkstome.com, it's all about creating a kick-ass life for yourself and those that you love. And I want you to do several things. 1, to subscribe. 2, to rate. Next, review. And if you want to leave me a bad review, that's nice too. I don't mind those. I got a big ego and I can handle it. And I love my trolls. Until next time.
Thanks for joining me on this podcast. If you like what you heard and learned, then be sure to do 3 things. 1, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. 2, share this with someone who may need to hear it also, and it may be your significant other. And 3, review it. Give me a good review. If you didn't like it, give me a bad review. I don't care. Just review me. And be sure to get my free video on 3 ways to get laid more frequently without begging. Opt in at oldguytalks.com. Don't be that guy that just takes in the information. Take action. Without action, you're not going to get the results you want.